Welcome to the Talea Ensemble's Open Forums discussion series. I'm Stephanie Liu, Talea's Director of Development and Marketing, and today I'm joined by Artun Çekem. Artun has written a piece for Talea that we are very excited to premiere in our next concert on March 20th, 2026 at 7:30 p.m. at the Church of St. Luke and St. Matthew in Brooklyn. And this piece is called Mea Pulpa, and it's scored for voice, ensemble, and electronics. Artun, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and congratulations on the upcoming premiere. We feel very, very lucky and excited to be working on this new piece of yours and to be working with you, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about your piece and kind of what sorts of conceptual questions you were thinking about when you started writing it?
Yeah, sure. The piece that I wrote for Talea Ensemble is titled Mea Pulpa, which we could translate from Latin as my flesh, or more literally, my pulp. And Mea Pulpa is essentially a work about guilt and the relationship between guilt and free will, more specifically, moral agency. And we could imagine this piece as a monodrama where soprano Sharon Harms will be giving voice to this figure of the penitent who is making a penitential plea as an expression of guilt. But instead of uttering the conventional phrase mea culpa, meaning my fault or through my fault, this penitent instead sings mea pulpa, through my body. So there's almost this displacement of blame there. And underlying the piece, there's this heart determinist claim where the self, the penitent, is basically claiming that they're attached to this material vessel, let's call the body, that is driven by deterministic forces beyond their control. So yeah, the piece is almost like a duet between the self and the body, who will be both voiced by Sharon Harms. And throughout the piece, she's holding this frame drum with a transducer attachment, and this basic geometry enveloped in skin. This frame drum is essentially a symbolic extension of the body, and her voice through a vocal headset will be simultaneously processed and amplified through this frame drum. So it's almost like she's giving voice both to the self and the body in this duet as two figures of this a monistic entity, basically, two separate facets of this single entity.
Okay, so you're saying that there's a sort of a visual aspect as well to the process of
Yeah.
holding the frame drum while singing and while performing. Is is she also going to be playing the frame drum in a percussive way, or mostly just it'll be processed through?
It's mostly a part of the drama. She won't be playing it percussively, but we are imagining certain dramatic movement that unfolds throughout the piece in relation to this duet between the self and the body. So there's movement involved, but sonically, it's mostly electronics and amplification that the frame drums roll. Yeah.
So how does the vocalist interact with the ensemble? Is it kind of a soloist portrayal, or what is the interaction like?
Yeah, this changes throughout the piece. There are parts where it is more like a traditional singing and an accompaniment, but then there's this eventual processes where her voice basically starts to become displaced and redistributed through the ensemble through multiple means, through electronics, through some spectral methods, through additional auxiliary instruments. I'm using these 3D printed tubes that model the human vocal tract, which the trombonist will be performing on. And yeah, so there's this basically gradual process of convergence between this subject and object where the penitent starts as the subject, but then eventually everything, both material and immaterial, gradually converge into this one monistic sound world, let's say, or that's at least the symbolic undertones of the piece.
So I'm curious about these 3D printed vocal tract tubes. I saw on your score that the trombonists would be using these.
Mhm.
What exact, could you tell us a little bit more about what are 3D printed vocal track tubes? What do they look like and
Sure.
how are they used?
I already used this in some earlier pieces of mine in different forms, but essentially there are these small tubes like of this size. I initially based this on this researcher from Japan, Takayuki Arai, who made these 3D printed models. And then based on his research, I made my own. And they basically comprise of two simple parts. There's the trombone mouthpiece that is already integrated with the tube, which functions as the larynx basically. By buzzing that mouthpiece, they're creating the oscillation that would be initially the function of the larynx. And then the rest of the tube models the shape, the various different shapes that our vocal tract would assume when we are pronouncing different vowels. For example, an ah vowel could be more characterized by an open mouth and a wider cavity, oral cavity. And then maybe E would be like a more narrower mouth and again, more constricted oral cavity. And these different shaped tubes basically very roughly model that vocal tract configuration. And the performer, by applying all these techniques like lip tension and hand muting and air pressure and all of that, can create these almost human-like, but also quite grotesque and uncanny in some way sounds that is kind of almost human, but not quite. And it basically creates this process of, let's say, materialization or physicalization of the voice that we initially hear from the penitent, the character of the penitent.
That's fascinating. So it seems like there are various manifestations of the physical aspects of the body throughout the ensemble as well as in the soloist. Is that?
Yeah, the main idea is basically, in a way, blurring the distinction between object and subject
Mhm.
and creating this monistic framework around the piece. It starts with a dualistic presentation in its drama because it's basically a duet between the self and the body. But then eventually, the plan is to converge them and meet in this monistic in-between area.
So I wanted to go back to the 3D printed um, vocal track tubes for a moment. Just so is 3D printing something that you are generally interested in your own research and your composition? And how has that shown up in other areas of your writing?
Sure. So far, I've only experimented with vocal tract tubes and again, human-like elements. So I haven't printed other kinds of instruments that are entirely separate from this concept. But the first time I did it was for a piece called Human Voices, where back then I didn't design my own models. I used the ones by the researcher Takayuki Arai, with his permission, of course. And the idea back then was to amplify this viol quartet through these tubes, so the instrument sounds would assume this human-like vocal qualities. Um, but then back then, this tubes didn't have that trombone mouthpiece attachment. They were instead mounted on these little horn drivers, these little loudspeakers that the instruments were amplified through. But then I decided I wanted to use these tubes more dynamically to allow like more organic expressions with the breath and tension and muting and all these dynamic sounds. So that's when I had the idea to use this oscillator basically. And I wrote this piece titled "This Person Does Not Exist," which Mea Pulpa is almost like a continuation of this extension of that piece because it also had some similar concepts of, again, using the frame drum and amplification and electronics and a whole bunch of, again, distorted and, let's say, grotesque sounds.
So I remember seeing that you yourself are an electric guitarist. Is that
Mhm.
correct? Okay. So how did you, I'm curious how you got from that into composition. When you first started on electric guitars, did you know that you wanted to be a composer? What sort of music did you used to be immersed in? And then how did you progress from that into composition?
Yeah, My beginning steps were with the guitar for sure. It was only during my undergrad studies back in Turkey, that I slowly started to get in composition. Um, and my practice in the electric guitar was quite distinct from what I started composing or being attracted to as a composer. But for years, I was playing gigs. We were playing rock, jazz, fusion, metal, all kinds of things, doing live gigs, doing free improvisation sessions, etc. But then, basically, towards the end of my undergrad, I grew interest in composing more. And I focused for my master's, I focused on composition. So guitar used to be the foreground, something that I used to do every day, basically. But then gradually it shifted to the background. And now I still occasionally play it, but it's been a while that I did um, anything professional with the guitar.
This piece incorporates electric guitar, right? You have the guitarist playing electric. Do you regularly write for electric guitar in your ensemble pieces?
Unfortunately not, because it hasn't been available to me a lot. So I'm very glad that we have the electric guitar in this piece. And it was certainly one of the most let's say, driving aspects of the compositional process, because this piece uses a lot of microtonal harmonies and configurations, which I started composing through the guitar first and then orchestrated the rest of the ensemble through the harmonies that I derived from the guitar, through these very particular chord voicings and microtonal beatings that you can get on the guitar. So that inspired a lot of Mea Pulpa's harmonic scheme. Um, my relationship with electronics, using digital audio workstations, using Ableton and other softwares. Um, when you're a gig musician or when you're used to performing more mainstream and popular genres, you basically become so accustomed to all kinds of different tools that become part of your vocabulary without you even realizing, basically. And so when I shifted into composition, I was already imagining sounds in terms of, let's say, like sound envelopes, like ADSR, or that things that would matter during, for example, when you're composing music digitally, all these like elements of sound, effects and reverberation, and also how you conceptualize sound on a grid where you can, instead of thinking of beats and notation, I would think of placing times on this open temporal canvas of time, basically, where you could move an audio clip just a few milliseconds late or early, and to me, it would change the feeling of the music. So even today, I use DAWs a lot when composing and trying to hear and imagine what the end result of the piece is gonna sound like.
So, have you worked with Sharon Harms before? And did you get to work with Sharon Harms to test anything out? What has that process looked like?
Yeah, we haven't met with Sharon before this project, but throughout this project, we got to work together before the rehearsals. We just recently met at a Columbia studio to record some samples of her voice, but also talk about this piece, about its choreography, about all these flexible elements relating to her singing and choreography, and how discussing basically how she would prefer to approach all these elements. I think it's already sounding great. Some of the things that she's already been doing in the studio, to me already is very exciting. Yeah.
That's amazing. That you haven't met her, that you hadn't met her before this, and yet this piece, it seems like it deals with such vulnerable issues of the self and the body and guilt
Mhm.
and all of this, and the fact that you are entrusting Sharon and also vice versa, to put on this piece is really incredible, and it's wonderful to hear that you've already been working together a little bit in the studio.
Yeah, for sure. I would say this piece and another earlier piece of mine, for example, titled Harp, they both, as you said, they both explore some very vulnerable and intimate scenarios. And in both of these pieces, I made sure to leave, let's say, enough space and also vagueness and indeterminacy where the performer could fill those spaces with their own experience and expression and allow that flexibility between where the performer is willing to go and where they may not relate to, for example. So I would say in both of these pieces, that's something to me that worked very well in term, at least I know in harp because I've had a lot of audience members that came to me and basically expressed their own interpretation and understanding of the underlying narrative and scenario behind that piece, the harp piece. And it both me and Parker, the performer of that piece, were pleasantly surprised, for example, how open that very deep and vulnerable thing can be interpreted in so many different ways by different people. So I hope that resonates in this piece as well, and it is always one of my intentions when I'm dealing with these kinds of concepts, basically.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is what do non-musicians hear when they hear something that is not necessarily tonal or not necessarily something that they're used to. And also in my role at Talia as involved in marketing and involved in explaining this music to the outside world, I'm also very curious about just like how audiences react to things. And so I wanted to ask you if somebody who really didn't know anything about music or new music were listening to your piece, what sorts of things would you guide their ear to, and what sorts of things would you have them listen for, or close their eyes and imagine?
Yeah. Um, Something I like about human-like sounds, anthropomorphic sounds, and also various ways that I try to defamiliarize that sound in several of my pieces, including Mea Pulpa, with all the electronics and the tubes and the other techniques, etc., is that the human sound is something so universal that we don't need any symbolic framework. We don't need any musical information to immediately relate to that the nature of that sound, because we all know what human sounds like, what a voice sounds like, etc. So something that I quite enjoy about writing, even if it's instrumental music, imbuing that instrumental sound with human-like elements and trying to inject this sense of organicness, let's say, into this musical texture is something that I enjoy doing, and I would probably guide their ears maybe to hear this not just as maybe a relationship between melody and harmony and these conventional elements, which I definitely still use in this piece, but also to these sonic and timbral elements that especially relating to human likeness. I don't necessarily think of, okay, now I wrote pleasant sounds, now it's time for unpleasant sounds, or like these kinds of distinctions don't really exist to me that much. To me, I always try to find these in between areas where sometimes perhaps even the listener is not sure what to feel. Sometimes it sounds almost like too grotesque to the point of sounding funny, or sometimes to me, I found so much beauty in what would conventionally be accepted to be dissonant, or these beating frequencies, for example, of these proximate pitches, etc. That is very much like banished from certain types of music. To me, I find so much beauty in that kind of sound world as well. And even like this human-like sounds, even though they might sound grotesque, to me they also can sound very musical. So yeah, I hope that I can manage to elicit this in between sound world where the listener can find something to attach onto themselves.
Okay, so you said you're a doctoral candidate at Columbia.
Mhm.
Where are you in that process? What are you working on these days? And do you have any other upcoming projects that we should know about?
Yeah, so right now this is my last semester in Colombia. It's kind of bittersweet. This is my
Congratulations.
sixth year and last semester. And actually, currently I'm writing my dissertation on this very piece that I'm writing for Talea Ensemble. It's called Mea Pulpa, a musical response to the problem of Moral Agency and Determinism is the title of the
Hmm.
dissertation.
Okay.
And it covers a whole bunch of concepts with, let's say, 2 millennia of philosophical literature, and as well as references to other composers' music like Peter Ablinger and Salvatore Sciarrino. Um, yeah. And actually, in terms of other works to look forward to, just 4 days after the Talea concert, I will also have a concert with the International Contemporary Ensemble with through Colombia. So just like literally the next day, I'm gonna have to attend rehearsals all over again, and I'm also super excited for that as well. But it's gonna be a packed week for sure.
Wow, it sounds like a super exciting spring for you, and good luck with your dissertation and finishing that up and the defense and everything. I certainly feel honored that Talia is a part of your dissertation research and
Likewise.
process. Artun, thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with me and for sharing a glimpse into your process and your piece. And for those who are listening, you can hear the premiere of Artun's new work performed by the Talia Ensemble on March 20th, 2026 at the Church of St. Luke and St. Matthew in Brooklyn. Tickets are available on our website at taliaensemble.org/concerts, and we'd love for you to join us and experience this piece live. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you at the concert.